My name is Marissa Cole. I'm 27 years old. 12 years ago, my mother kicked me out into a freezing storm over a lie. Today, I'm the one holding the keys to her survival, and she's the one begging to come in. The smell of damp cedar and wood smoke always reminds me of the day my life ended, and the day it truly began. In coastal Oregon, the rain doesn't just fall, it colonizes. It seeps into your bones, your floorboards, and your temperament. At 15, I was used to the gray. I was a straight-A student with sun-bleached blonde hair that I usually kept in a messy ponytail, and hands that were perpetually stained with ink from my AP history notes, or grease from my shift at the local diner. "Marissa, stop scowling. You'll get wrinkles before you're 20, my mother, Elena, said without looking up from the stove. She was humming a tune I didn't recognize, her movements light, almost girlish. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was beautiful in a fragile way, like a piece of glass that had been glued back together too many times. For years, it had been just us. We were a team. We shared cheap pizza on Friday nights and complained about the drafty windows of our small, salt-fretted house. Then came Rick. He was sitting at our small laminate kitchen table, his heavy work boots scuffing the linoleum I'd spent Saturday scrubbing. He was a thick-necked man with eyes that never quite met mine, always sliding away like oil on water. "Let the girl be, Elena," Rick said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes tracking me as I reached for a glass of water. "She's just at that age, thinks she knows better than everyone else. Don't you, princess?" I didn't answer. I could feel the prickle of heat on the back of my neck. I knew his type. He was a predator who had found a soft place to land. My mother was that soft place. "I'm going to my room to study," I muttered, turning away. "Wait," Mom said, turning around. She held a small, weathered envelope. My heart gave a tiny, unexplained thud. That was the emergency fund, the cash she'd been squirreling away for her dental surgery. "Marissa, have you seen the rest of the rent money? I put the extra $50 in here this morning." I shook my head. "No, I haven't touched it." I caught a glimpse of Rick. He wasn't looking at the beer anymore. He was looking at me, a tiny, jagged smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. It was the look of a man who had already won a game I didn't even know we were playing. "You're sure?" Rick asked, leaning back so the chair legs creaked ominously. "Because I saw you poking around the kitchen drawers earlier while your mom was in the shower. You looked nervous." "I was looking for a highlighter, Rick. You know that." "Marissa, don't use that tone with him," Mom sighed, but her eyes were darting to the envelope, then back to me. A seed of doubt had been planted. I could see it taking root in the lines around her mouth. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window pane in its frame like a desperate ghost trying to get in. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was already inside. The air in the kitchen turned thick, like it was filled with smoke I couldn't see. My mother's hands were shaking as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd had as long as I could remember. "Rick, I'm sure she didn't," she started, but her voice trailed off, sounding small and uncertain. "Honey, you're too soft," Rick said, standing up. He seemed to triple in size when he stood, his shadow stretching across the yellowed linoleum until it swallowed my feet. "You work yourself to the bone at that hospital. And for what? So she can sneak around and spend your hard-earned cash on whatever those kids are doing down by the pier? I saw her bag in the hallway. It looked heavy." "My bag is full of textbooks, Rick. I have an exam tomorrow," I shouted. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. I looked at my mother. "Mom, tell him you know I wouldn't do that." Elena looked at me, her eyes watery and searching. She wanted to believe me, but Rick's hand was already on her shoulder, his thumb rubbing the base of her neck in a way that looked like comfort but felt like a leash.
"Just check the bag, Elena," Rick whispered, "for peace of mind. If it's not there, I'll apologize. I'll buy you both dinner at the steakhouse." I felt a cold wave of confidence. I knew my bag. I knew every pen, every scrap of paper, every dog-eared page of my biology book. "Fine," I spat, my voice cracking. "Check it. Go ahead. Show him how wrong he is." I marched into the hallway, the two of them trailing behind me. My backpack was slumped against the wall, looking innocent and worn. I grabbed it by the strap and thrust it toward my mother. "Open it," I challenged. Elena took the bag with trembling fingers. The sound of the zipper was deafening in the narrow hall, a long, jagged zip that sounded like teeth grinding together. She reached into the front pocket, nothing but pens. She reached into the main compartment, pushing aside my binders. Then her hand stopped. Her face didn't just go pale, it went gray. She pulled out a small, crumpled envelope, the exact same one she had used for the dental fund. She opened it, and I saw the flash of green, the $20 bills neatly folded. "Marissa," she whispered. The word sounded like it was breaking in her throat. "No," I breathed, the floor feeling like it was tilting beneath me. "Mom, I didn't. I don't know how that got there. He put it there. Rick put it there." I pointed a finger at him, but Rick just shook his head, a mask of profound disappointment settling over his face. "Kid, that's low. Stealing from your own mother's surgery fund and then blaming the guy trying to help her?" "You liar! You freaking liar!" I lunged for him, but Elena stepped between us. She didn't hug me, she pushed me back. It wasn't a hard push, but it felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice suddenly flat, dead. "I work double shifts so you can have nice clothes and a future, and you are just like your father, devious, cold." "Mom, please, look at him. Look at his face." Outside, the sky finally broke. A crack of thunder shook the house, followed by the heavy, rhythmic drumming of a torrential downpour. "I want you out," she said. The world went silent. Even the rain seemed to mute. "What?" "You heard her, princess," Rick said, dropping the concerned act. He stepped forward, grabbing my duffel bag from the closet floor and shoving it into my chest. "You're a thief and a liar. We don't want that under this roof. Get out." "Mom!" I looked at her, pleading. She wouldn't look at me. She turned her back and walked into the kitchen, her shoulders hunched. Rick grabbed my arm. His grip was like a vice, his fingers digging into my skin. He dragged me toward the front door. I fought, I kicked, I screamed her name, but the door slammed open and the freezing Oregon rain lashed against my face. "Have a nice life, Marissa," Rick sneered. He threw my bag onto the gravel driveway, then he shoved me. I stumbled, my sneakers slipping on the wet stones, and I fell hard onto my hands and knees. The heavy oak door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt click. I sat there in the mud, the rain soaking through my thin hoodie in seconds, staring at the silhouette of my mother through the frosted glass of the door. She didn't move. She didn't come for me. She just turned off the porch light, leaving me in the dark.
I didn't leave the driveway for a long time. I sat in the gravel, the mud soaking through my jeans, waiting for the door to creak open. I waited for my mother to realize it was all a mistake, to scream at Rick, to pull me back into the warmth. But the house stayed silent. The only sound was the rhythmic thwack, thwack of the rain hitting my duffel bag. Eventually, the cold moved from my skin to my bones, a deep, aching shiver that told me I would die if I stayed there. I stood up, my legs shaking. I didn't look back at the house. If I did, I knew I'd break, and I couldn't afford to be broken anymore. I was 15. I had $42 in my pocket from my last diner shift and a bag full of wet clothes.
The next 2 years were a blur of fluorescent-lit hallways and the smell of industrial cleaner. I became a ward of the state. I learned quickly that in the foster system, you have to be invisible or you have to be a predator. I chose a third option. I became a ghost. I studied in the back of noisy group homes with my fingers in my ears. I worked under the table at car washes and greasy spoons, saving every nickel. I didn't cry. Crying was a luxury for people with a home. "You're a strange one, Marissa," one of my social workers, a tired woman named Mrs. Gable, told me during my senior year. "You don't get into fights, you don't do drugs, you just work. What are you looking for?" "I'm not looking for anything," I told her, my voice already losing its soft teenage lilt. "I'm building a wall." I graduated at the top of my class. No one was there to watch me walk across the stage. I sold my class ring a week later to pay for a bus ticket to Portland. The transition from discarded teen to Marissa Cole didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing burn. It was 4 years of college on a shoestring budget, living on black coffee and generic ramen. It was 3 years of working as a junior analyst, being the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I stopped being the girl in the rain. I grew my hair long, bleaching it to a sharp, expensive platinum that looked like a halo but felt like a helmet. I traded my sneakers for 4-inch stilettos that made me click-clack across marble floors with the authority of a heartbeat. 12 years later, I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window in a skyscraper overlooking the city. My reflection showed a woman in a charcoal gray power suit, her expression unreadable. "The acquisition is finalized, Miss Cole," my assistant Sarah said from the doorway. I didn't turn around. I was looking at a map on my tablet, a map of a small, rain-drenched town on the coast. "The distressed properties in the Oregon sector?" I asked. My voice was smooth, like expensive bourbon. "Yes, we've secured the entire block of Pine Street. Most are foreclosures. We can break ground on the luxury condos by spring." I zoomed in on the map. Pine Street, number 412. The house with the drafty windows and the salt-fretted siding. "Prepare the car, Sarah," I said, a cold, familiar spark lighting up in my chest. "I want to inspect the site personally." The girl in the rain had been waiting 12 years to go home, and she wasn't bringing an umbrella.
The town of Oakhaven hadn't grown. It had only fermented. As my black SUV rolled over the bridge, the tires humming a low, expensive tune against the asphalt, I looked out the window. It was like driving through a faded photograph. The same neon sign for the diner, the E still flickering like a dying heartbeat, and the same salt-crusted fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. "Should I park at the end of the block, Miss Cole?" my driver, Marcus, asked. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden tightness in my throat. "Pull up right in front of 412. We slowed to a crawl. The neighborhood was a graveyard of broken dreams. Fences leaned at precarious angles, and the lawns were more mud than grass. Then we stopped. 412 Pine Street. It looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint was now a sickly, peeling gray. One of the porch steps was completely rotted through, and a blue tarp was weighted down with bricks over a section of the roof. It was a house that had given up. And then I saw her. The front door opened, the same oak door that had slammed shut on my life, and a woman stepped out. She was carrying a heavy plastic bag of trash, her movements slow and labored. Her hair, once a vibrant chestnut, was now a thin, dry silver. She was wearing a faded hospital scrub top that looked 2 sizes too big for her frail frame. Elena, my mother. I felt a surge of something, not pity, not yet, but a strange, cold recognition. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life.
She struggled with the heavy bag, eventually dropping it near the porch where it split open, spilling coffee grounds and old mail onto the mud. She stood there for a long moment, her shoulders slumped, staring at the mess. "Do you want to get out, Miss Cole?" Marcus asked, watching me through the rearview mirror. I adjusted my dark sunglasses. Not yet. I watched as she knelt in the mud, her hands shaking as she tried to scoop the trash back into the bag. She looked exhausted, her face lined with a decade of worry and regret. There was no sign of Rick, no shiny truck in the driveway, just a rusted-out sedan with a flat tire sitting under a layer of pine needles. She looked up then, squinting toward the tinted windows of my SUV. She couldn't see me, but she knew the car didn't belong here. She wiped her hands on her pants and stood a little straighter, a flicker of hope, or perhaps fear, crossing her face. I opened the door. The air hit me first, that familiar mix of salt, pine, and rot. My heels clicked onto the cracked pavement with a sharp metallic sound. I looked every bit the woman I had become, a predator in a $1,000 suit. Elena took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was thin, like paper tearing. She didn't recognize me. To her, I was just a representative of the world that was finally coming to take what little she had left. "I'm here to inspect the property," I said. I didn't call her Mom. I didn't even use her name. I just looked at the house, my eyes tracing the decay. "I'm Marissa Cole. I represent the firm that bought your debt." She paled, her eyes widening as the name registered, but she still didn't make the connection. She just saw the name Cole on the legal documents she'd been ignoring. "Oh," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Please, I was told I had another month. I'm working double shifts at the clinic. I can pay. I just need a little more time." I looked at her, really looked at her through the dark lenses of my glasses. Time is the one thing you can't afford.
Elena's face crumbled. It was a slow-motion collapse of features I used to study for signs of weather, to know if it was safe to ask for a new notebook or if I should stay in my room. Now those features were just a roadmap of failure. "Miss Cole, please," she stammered, stepping back and gesturing toward the open door. "Come inside. Let's talk. I can make tea. The stove still works." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stay in the sterilized safety of the SUV, but the girl I used to be, the one who had been pushed out of that very door, demanded to see the wreckage. I stepped over the threshold. The house smelled of damp newsprint and cheap floral perfume. It was a mask for the rot. The wallpaper was bubbling in the corners, and the linoleum in the hallway was curling like burnt skin. My heels clicked with a sharp, aggressive precision on the wood, a sound that felt like it was cracking the silence of the last 12 years. I walked into the kitchen. The laminate table was still there, the same one where Rick had sat, his boots scuffing the floor. It was scarred now, covered in piles of unopened mail and pill bottles. "Where is he?" I asked, my back to her as I traced the edge of the counter. "Who?" Elena asked, her voice hovering near my shoulder. "The man, Rick." I heard her catch her breath. He's been gone a long time. 6 months after things changed. He took the car, he took the savings, he took everything that wasn't bolted down." I turned around. She was standing by the sink, her hands twisted in a dish towel. She looked so small. It was hard to believe this was the giant who had decided my fate with a single look. "You stayed here," I said. It wasn't a question. "I had nowhere else to go," she whispered. She looked at me then, her eyes searching my face with a sudden, frantic intensity. "You have a look about you. You remind me of someone I lost." I didn't blink. I didn't let the mask slip.
I'm sure I have a very common face, Elena. She flinched at the use of her name. Please, Miss Cole, if you're the one in charge of the debt, you have to see. I've lived here 30 years. This house is all I have. If I lose this, I'm on the street. At my age, with my health. She moved toward me, her hands reaching out as if to grab my sleeve, then pulling back at the last second, intimidated by the expensive wool of my suit. I'm begging you, she said, her voice cracking. Don't take my home. I'll do anything. I'll work triple shifts. I'll sell the furniture. Just don't throw me out. The irony was a bitter pill under my tongue. She was begging me not to throw her out of the house she had thrown me out of. The decision isn't made here, Elena, I said, my voice as cold as the Oregon rain. There are protocols, legalities. Then let me come to your office. Let me talk to your board. I can show them my pay stubs. I can show them I'm a hard worker. I looked at the kitchen door, the one that led to the hallway where the zipper of a backpack had sounded like a death knell. Fine, I said. I pulled a thick, cream-colored business card from my pocket and laid it on the scarred table. My office, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Don't be late. I walked out before she could say thank you. I didn't look back until I was inside the SUV, the door closing with a heavy, pressurized thud that shut out the world. Back to the hotel, Marcus, I said. My heart was racing, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ribs. I had the power now. I was the one with the key. And tomorrow, the storm was finally going to come full circle.
The top floor of the Cole and Associates building tasted like ozone and expensive leather. It was a world of sharp angles, floor-to-ceiling glass, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. Up here, the Oregon rain didn't feel threatening. It just looked like a decorative texture on the windows. I sat in my high-backed leather chair, my back to the door. I was staring out at the city, watching the tiny, ant-like cars crawl through the puddles below. Miss Cole? Sarah's voice came over the intercom, crisp and professional. A Mrs. Elena Miller is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment on the main ledger, but she says you gave her your card? Send her in, Sarah, I said. I didn't turn around. I heard the heavy glass door creak open. The sound of Elena's footsteps was hesitant, a rhythmic scuff-tap that stood out painfully against the polished marble floor. She smelled of the bus, damp wool and exhaust, a scent that had no business being in a room that cost $5,000 a month just to air condition. Miss Cole? She whispered. I stayed still. I wanted her to feel the height of this room. I wanted her to feel how far away she was from the woman holding her life in her hands. I came as soon as I could, she continued, her voice trembling. I wore my best clothes. I hope that's okay. I could imagine her best clothes, a polyester skirt from a thrift store and a cardigan with pilled sleeves. Sit down, Elena, I said, my voice low. I heard the chair groan as she sank into it. She started talking immediately, the words tumbling out of her like a dam breaking. She spoke about her years of service at the clinic, her mounting medical bills, and how the emergency fund had been stolen all those years ago. She spoke about Rick, calling him a mistake and a leech. I was a fool, she sobbed, and I heard the sound of her rubbing her eyes with a handkerchief. I let a man cloud my judgment. I lost the only thing that mattered because of a lie he told. I've lived with that regret every single night. I see her face every time it rains. My grip tightened on the armrests of my chair. My knuckles were white, the skin stretched thin. You lost a daughter, I said, finally. The room went deathly silent. How did you know that? She asked, her voice barely a breath. Because stories like yours are common in my line of work, Elena. I lied, though the lie felt like ash in my mouth. People choose the wrong things. They throw away the gold and keep the lead, and then they come to people like me begging for a second chance. I'm not asking for a second chance at life, just my home. Please, if you take that house, I have nothing. I'll be just like she was, out in the cold with nowhere to go. I can't survive that. I'm begging you, on my knees if I have to. I heard the rustle of fabric as she actually moved to get out of the chair to prostrate herself on my floor. Don't, I snapped. I slowly began to rotate the chair. The motor hummed, a soft, expensive purr. As the chair turned, I took off my dark sunglasses. I let the harsh fluorescent lights hit my face, illuminating every sharp line, every inch of the iron blonde I had spent 12 years building. I looked directly into her eyes. The girl you threw out didn't have a chair to sit in, Elena. She didn't have an office. She had a bag of wet clothes and a mother who locked the deadbolt. Elena's mouth fell open. Her eyes traveled from my platinum hair to my eyes, searching for the child she had discarded. The handkerchief dropped from her hand, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. "Marissa?" she choked out. I leaned forward, placing my elbows on the mahogany desk. "Hello, Mom. It's been a while." The silence in the room was so heavy I could hear the hum of the computer servers in the walls. Elena didn't move. She didn't scream. She just sat there, her face draining of what little color it had left until she looked like a marble statue of grief. "Marissa?" she whispered again, her voice cracking like dry wood. My baby?" "Don't," I said, the word cutting through the air like a blade. "I stopped being your baby the second that deadbolt clicked. You didn't just kick me out, Elena. You erased me." She began to tremble, not the gentle shaking of a nervous woman, but a violent, full-bodied shudder. She reached across the mahogany desk, her fingers clawing at the air as if trying to bridge the 12-year gap between us. I instinctively pulled back, my chair rolling a few inches away. "I didn't know," she sobbed, the tears carving tracks through her cheap foundation. "Rick, he told me things. He made me believe you were heading down a dark path. He said if I didn't show you tough love, I'd lose you to the streets anyway." "So you gave me the streets to save me from the streets?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low velvet. "You saw the bruises on my arms where he grabbed me. You saw how I stayed up until 3 a.m. studying. You knew I wasn't a thief, but he was warm in your bed, and I was just a reminder of a life you wanted to forget. You chose a predator over your own blood." Elena fell from the chair. She didn't just sit on the floor, she collapsed onto her knees, her forehead nearly touching the polished marble. She was literally at my feet, her hands clasped together in a prayer of desperation. "I'm so sorry," she wailed, the sound echoing off the glass walls. "I've regretted it every day. I looked for you. I called the police, but they said you were a ward of the state and I'd signed away my rights when I let you go." "You didn't look hard enough," I said coldly. "I was 30 miles away for 3 years. I was in the local paper for winning the regional debate title. My name was everywhere. You didn't look because looking meant admitting what you'd done." "Please," she gasped, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm an old woman, Marissa. I have nothing, no one. Rick took the money, the car, my pride, and now the bank is taking the house. I'm begging you, not as the CEO of this company, but as my daughter. Help me. Let me come back in. Give me a chance to make it up to you."
The title of the story flashed through my mind like a neon sign. Now she's the one begging to come in. She was begging for the warmth of my world. She wanted the safety of my house, the protection of my wealth, the comfort of the daughter she had treated like trash. I looked down at her, this frail, broken woman who had once been my entire world, and for the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel the burning heat of rage. I felt nothing, a vast, icy emptiness. "You want to come in, Elena?" I asked, standing up. I walked around the desk until I was standing directly over her. My shadow swallowed her whole. "Yes," she whispered, a spark of hope lighting up her eyes. "Please." I looked out at the rain-streaked window, thinking of the girl in the mud, staring at the porch light as it went dark. I've already made my decision.
I reached down, not to pull her up into a hug, but to hand her a single sheet of paper from my desk. It was a legal document, already signed and notarized. "What is this?" Elena asked, her voice trembling as she took the paper. "It's a lease agreement," I said, returning to my seat behind the mahogany desk. I felt the distance between us like a physical barrier, one I had built brick by brick, year by year. I have purchased a small, one-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex 3 towns over. It's near a reputable medical clinic. The rent is paid in full for the next 5 years. After that, a trust will cover it for the rest of your life. Elena looked at the paper, then back at me. A glimmer of relief crossed her face, but it was quickly overshadowed by confusion. "And the house? Pine Street?" "Pine Street is being demolished on Monday," I said flatly. "That house is a tomb, Elena. It's where you buried your daughter. I'm not letting anyone live in those walls again." She flinched. "But when can I move in with you? When can we start over?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a twinge of something that wasn't ice. It was pity. But pity isn't love, and it certainly isn't a reason to let a person who broke you back into your heart. "You aren't moving in with me, Elena. You aren't coming into my life. This apartment, the medical bills, the trust, that is the final act of the girl you threw away. It's a gift of mercy, not a bridge to a relationship." "Marissa, please," she cried out, reaching for the edge of my desk again. "I'm your mother." A mother is a person who protects. A mother is the one who keeps the storm out, not the one who pushes her child into it. You lost the right to that title 12 years ago. I pressed the button on my intercom. "Sarah, please show Mrs. Miller to the lobby. My driver is waiting to take her to the new apartment. Her things have already been moved." Elena stood up slowly. She looked at the paper in her hand, then at the vast, cold luxury of my office. She realized then that the "get out" she had screamed at me a decade ago had finally been returned. But mine wasn't shouted in a fit of rage. It was delivered with the calm, terrifying weight of a final judgment. She opened her mouth to speak, saw the look in my eyes, and closed it. She turned and walked toward the glass doors. She looked smaller with every step until she disappeared into the hallway. The silence returned, but it was different now. It didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. I walked over to the window. Outside, the storm had finally begun to break. A sliver of pale Oregon sun was cutting through the charcoal clouds, reflecting off the glass buildings and the wet streets below. I leaned my forehead against the cool pane. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't waiting for the rain to stop. I wasn't waiting for an apology or for a door to open. I had built my own door, and I was the only one with the key. I watched the black SUV pull away from the curb far below, carrying the woman who gave me life and the woman who tried to destroy it. I whispered a final goodbye to the girl in the rain, then turned back to my desk. I had a company to run. I had a life to live, and for the first time, the sky was perfectly clear.